I think it's kind of a funny thing, the way that democracy works, because democracy, even in the United States, which has very lax free speech laws, as well as laws around assembly and so on because of the Constitution, even in our country, there is an amendment that is explicitly anti democratic, or rather, provisions in the 14th Amendment that are explicitly anti democratic. That being Section 3, which makes it to where anyone who has, any officer of the law who has aided or abetted insurrection is barred from office. And that is an explicitly anti democratic provision in our Constitution. Why is it there? To prevent the overthrow of democracy. That's why it's there. And it's interesting to me that in this country, as well as in countries around the world, you have, to varying degrees, provisions in their laws that make it to where you cannot get elected if you have positions that are explicitly anti-democratic, or rather, you cannot get elected if your goal is to destroy the institutions of democracy. And in order for that liberal democracy to work, they need some way of preventing these autocrats from coming into power, some legal mechanism by which they can target those people so that the system is not overthrown. I think with corporations, it is a similar deal with the market, with capitalism, because we know that there are certain things that people need that do not function well when they're left up entirely to the market. Healthcare is a good example of this. When you have a private healthcare system, you have tons of uninsured people who go to the emergency room. And when they go to the emergency room, they end up having to not pay their bill because they don't have insurance, and then that bill ends up going to the government because the government has to bail out the hospital so the hospital continues to function, but the hospital has accrued all of this debt from the people going to the emergency rooms. And they wouldn't even have to go to the emergency rooms if they had gotten consistent care from a primary care doctor, for example, who would treat the symptoms of whatever disorder or ailment that happened to show up. They would treat those symptoms to prevent them from getting so big that they explode, and then you have to go to the doctor. Heart problems are a good example of this. If you're seeing your cardiologist consistently, you're not going to end up in the ER, generally speaking. But if you're uninsured and you have those problems, or perhaps don't even know that you have those problems, you land in the emergency room, the hospital has to foot the bill. And that bill goes to the government in the form of a bailout every year, so that the institution will continue to function. But it would literally be cheaper if those people got consistent outpatient care from doctors that are paid for by the government. It would be cheaper if the government simply owned the hospitals, operated them, and paid for everything involved, because they would not have to respond to these massive amounts of debt. They would not have to pay at the prices that are decided on by the corporations, which objectively engage in price gouging. So healthcare is an institution where the market doesn't really meet the needs of the people. It doesn't really work. And the way that you ameliorate that is by having a universal system. So there are other things as well. The vast majority of R&D that is funded by the government ends up in the hands of private companies. They send massive amounts to these research and development firms, or to people doing work in universities who are simply passionate about the subject. The RNA vaccine is one example of this. That was mostly just government funds looking into this thing, because that thing happened to not be profitable enough to get off the ground without government support. The companies were skeptical of the new technology, among other things, but the government took a chance, and they had those people do their thing. They wouldn't have done their thing if it was entirely left up to the market. So there are innovations that are made constantly, but those innovations tend to be the result of government money. I mean, Cuba made a lung cancer vaccine, a vaccine for lung cancer. They invented it. Cuba has gotten rid of the transfer of mother to child HIV. They have a treatment that keeps HIV from spreading to children. That is incredible. The innovations that they have been able to make through the power of the state, through the massive funding of their healthcare system, is nothing short of incredible. Now, of course, there's problems. The doctors are underpaid. They have to do other jobs, and that's a terrible thing. We need to lift the embargo and help those people out. But this is an example of what the government can do. And you don't have to look so far as Cuba. In the United States, once again, the RNA vaccine, that was the government. And the idea that we should be throwing money at these private institutions, I think primarily comes from the idea that is popular in the general population, that the government is not good at making stuff. The government is not going to be able to provide the necessary products to the people. This is simply wrong, because the government pays people who are experts and who are passionate about this research, who want to do this job. And while they're getting paid by them, those people don't equal the government. You know, like, this is not some shadowy institution that's going to take over everything at any moment to make everyone's lives worse. This is an institution that is necessary to intervene in certain sectors of the economy. And so, much in the same way that in order for democracy to perpetuate itself, you must have certain anti-democratic provisions in the law. With capitalism, in order for it to function, you have to have certain anti-capitalist sentiments in the managers of the country, the people who intend on fixing things. And that is the fundamental dynamic at play. You need hospitals in order for people to go to work, to contribute to the economy. You need people going to doctors for that same reason. And you need innovations in IT, in medical research, in space technology. These things have all done better under the eyes of the government. And this consistent privatization is completely unnecessary, and arguably, it leads to slush funds. Well, there was a recent case where 250 million Canadian dollars were given to 4 guys in a basement of a cabin. They didn't do anything for the app to track the people who entered Canada during COVID. They did not do anything to build that app, and yet they were given 250 million, I believe was the number, of taxpayer dollars to develop something for this app. If the government simply had a committee or a regulatory body or, a group that was explicitly focused on IT and research and development with IT, we would know where the money goes, because there are transparency laws that mandate that the government give out certain information and update us on what the hell is going on. And the people who are appointed to those positions, who are brought in, if they do a bad job, they're accountable to the people. Of course, you're not voting on the doctors and scientists, but you're voting on the people who oversee the broader project at hand. And it is more transparent when you can directly see what the government is doing and comment on it, and they're held accountable by vote. And so I think a lot of money is being wasted, and a lot of it is just becoming simple theft and graft by nefarious individuals. And the way you address that is by creating a larger state, creating a state where things are made that need to be made, that don't necessarily have an incentive. The people don't necessarily have an incentive to build these things in the market because the money isn't there, but the government sends the money. No, it's strange because we all seem to understand that the government ought to intervene in the market when the market cannot make certain things that we need. We all understand that. And yet, that money is going to private companies to do the thing. Why is it not the government doing the thing? I think it's because people have this widespread attitude that the government that works best does the least. This is a popular idea, and it needs to change.